Chapter 19. The Torres Straits. During the night of the 27th or the 20th of December, the Nautilus left the shores of Vanikoro with great speed. Her course was southwesterly, and in 3 days she had gone over the 750 leagues that separated it from La Perouse Group and the southeast point of Pampu. Early on the 1st of January, 1863, Council joined me on the platform. "Master, will you permit me to wish you a Happy New Year?" "What, Council? Exactly as if I was at Paris in my study at the Jardin des Plantes? Well, I accept your good wishes and thank you for them. Only, I will ask you what you mean by a Happy New Year under our circumstances. Do you mean the year that will bring us to the end of our imprisonment, or the year that sees us continue this strange voyage?" "Really, I do not know how to answer, master. We are sure to see curious things, and for the last 2 months we have not had time for ennui. The last marvels is always the most astonishing, and if we continue this progression, I do not know how it will end. It is my opinion that we shall never again see the like. I think, then, with no offense to master, that a Happy New Year would be one in which we could see everything." On January 2nd, we had made 11,340 miles, or 5,250 French leagues, since our starting point in the Japan seas. Before the ship's head stretched the dangerous shores of the Coral Sea, on the northeast coast of Australia. Our boat lay among some miles from the redoubtable bank on which Cook's vessel was lost, June 10, 1770. The boat in which Cook was struck on a rock, and if it did not sink, it was owing to a piece of the coral that was broken by the shock, and fixed itself in the broken keel. I had wished to visit the reef 360 leagues long, against which the sea, always rough, broke with great violence, with a noise like thunder. But just then, the inclined planes drew the Nautilus down to a great depth, and I could see nothing of the high coral walls. I had to content myself with the different specimens of fish brought up by the nets. I remarked among others some guermons, a species of mackerel as large as a tunny, with bluish sides and striped with transverse bands that disappear with the animal's life. These fish followed us in shoals and furnished us with a very delicate food. We took also a large number of gilt heads, about 1½ inches long, tasting like dories, and flying piripeds like submarine swallows, which in dark nights light alternately the air and water with their phosphorescent light. Among the mollusks and zoophytes, I found in the meshes of the net several species of alcinarians, echini, hammers, spurs, dials, sea rights, and haliae. The flora was represented by beautiful floating seaweeds, laminurae, and macrocystes, impregnated with the mucilage that transludes through their pores, and among which I gathered an admirable Nemostoma gilenstarius that was classed among the natural curiosities of the museum. 2 days after crossing the Coral Sea, January 4th, we sighted the Papuan coasts. On this occasion, Captain Nemo informed me that his intention was to get into the Indian Ocean by the Straits of Torres. His communication ended there. Now, the Torres Straits are nearly 34 leagues wide, but they are obstructed by an innumerable quantity of islands, islets, breakers, and rocks, and make its navigation almost impractical, so that Captain Nemo took all needful precautions to cross them. The Nautilus, floating betwixt wind and water, went at a moderate pace, and her screw, like a cetacean's tail, beat the waves slowly. Profiting by this, I and my 2 companions went up on the deserted platform. Before us was the steersman's cage, and I expected that Captain Nemo was there directing the course of the Nautilus. I had before me the excellent charts of the Straits of Torres, made out by the hydrographical engineer Vicedian Dumoulin. These and Captain King's are the best charts that clear the intricacies of this strait, and I consulted them attentively. Round the Nautilus, the sea dashed furiously. The course of the waves that went from southeast to northwest at the rate of 2.5 miles broke on the coral and showed itself here and there. "This is a bad sea," remarked Ned Land. "Detestable indeed, and one that does not suit a boat like the Nautilus." "The captain must be very sure of his route, for I see 3 pieces of coral that would do for its keel if it only touched them slightly." Indeed, the situation was dangerous, but the Nautilus seemed to glide like magic off these rocks. It did not follow the routes of the Astrolabe or the Zealy exactly, for they proved fatal to Dumont d'Urville. It bore more northwards, coasted the islands of Murray, and came back to the southwest towards Cumberland Passage. Well, I thought it was going to pass by him, when, going back to the northwest, it went through a large quantity of islands and islets little known towards the Island Sound and Canal Mavis. Well, I wondered if Captain Nemo, foolishly imprudent, would steer his vessel into that pass where Dumont d'Urville's 2 corvettes touched. When, swerving again and cutting straight through the west, he steered for the island of Gilboa. It was then 3 in the afternoon, and the tide began to recede, being quite full, and the Nautilus approached the island that I still saw with its remarkable border of screw pines. We stood off it at about 2 miles distant. Suddenly a shock overthrew me. The Nautilus just touched a rock and stayed immovable, laying lightly to port side. When I rose, I perceived Captain Nemo's lieutenants on the platform. They were examining the situation of the vessel and exchanging words in their incomprehensible dialect. She was situated thus 2 miles on the starboard side toward Gilboa, stretching from north to west like an immense arm. Towards the south and east, some coral showed itself, left by the ebb. We had run aground, and in one of those seas where the tides was middling, a sorry matter for the floating of the Nautilus. However, the vessel had not suffered, for her keel was solidly joined. But if she could neither glide off nor move, she ran the risk of being forever fastened to these rocks, and then Captain Nemo's submarine vessel would be done for. I was reflecting thus when the captain, cool and calm, always master of himself, approached me. "An accident?" I asked. "No, an incident." "But an incident that will oblige you perhaps to become an inhabitant of this island from which you flee?" Captain looked at me curiously, and made a negative gesture, so much as to say that nothing would force him to set foot on terra firma again. Then he said, "Besides, Mr. Aeronaut, the Nautilus is not lost. It will carry you yet in the midst of the marvels of the ocean. Our voyage is only begun, and I do not wish to be deprived so soon of the honor of your company." "However," Captain Nemo replied, without noticing the ironical turn of the phrase, "the Nautilus ran around an open sea. Now, the tides are not strong in the Pacific, and if you cannot lighten the Nautilus, I do not see how it will be reinflated." "The tides are not strong in the Pacific, you are right there, Professor, but in the Torres Straits one finds still a difference of 1.5 yards between the level of high and low seas. Today is January 4th, and in 5 days the moon will be full. Now, I shall be very much astonished if that complacent satellite does not raise these masses of water sufficiently and render me a service that I should be indebted to her for." Having said this, Captain Nemo, followed by his lieutenants, redescended to the interior of the Nautilus. As to the vessel, it moved not, and it was immovable, as if the coralline polypi had already walled it up with their indestructible cement. "Well, sir," said Ned Land, who came up to me after the departure of the captain. "Well, friend Ned, we will wait patiently for the tide on the 9th instant, for it appears that the moon will have the goodness to put it off again." "Really?" "Really." "And this captain is not going to cast anchor at all, since the tides will suffice?" said Counsel simply. The Canadian looked at Counsel, then shrugged his shoulders. "Sir, you may believe me when I tell you that this piece of iron will navigate neither on nor under the sea again. It is only fit to be sold for its weight. I think, therefore, that the time has come to part company with the Nautilus." "Friend Ned, I do not despair of this stout Nautilus as you do, and in 4 days we shall know what it hold on to the Pacific tides. Besides, flight might be possible if we were in the sight of the English or the provincial coast, but on the Papuan shores it's another thing. And it will be time enough to come to that extremity if the Nautilus does not recover itself again, which I look upon as a grave event. But as you know at least how to act circumspectly, there is an island. On that island there are trees. Under those trees, terrestrial animals, bears of cutlets and roast beef, to which I would willingly give a trial. In this, Fred Nend is right, said Council, and I agree with him. Could not Master obtain permission from his friend Captain Nemo to put on to land? If only so as not to lose the habit of treading on the solid parts of our planet. I'll ask him, but he will refuse. Will Master risk it? Asked Council. And we shall know how to rely upon the captain's amiability? To my great surprise, Captain Nemo gave me the permission I asked for, and he gave it very agreeable, without even exacting from me a promise to return to the vessel. But flight against New Guinea might be very perilous, and I should not have counseled Ned Land to attempt it. Better to be a prisoner on board the Nautilus than to fall into the hands of the natives. At 8 o'clock, armed with guns and hatchets, we got off the Nautilus. The sea was pretty calm. A slight breeze blew on land. Council and I rowing, we sped quickly along, and Ned steered in the straight passage that the breakers left between them. The boat was well handled and moved rapidly. Ned Land could not restrain his joy. He was like a prisoner that had escaped from prison and knew not that it was necessary to re-enter it. Meat! We're going to eat some meat! And what meat, he replied. Real game, no bread, indeed. I do not say that fish is not good. We must not abuse it, but a piece of fresh venison grilled on live coals will agreeably vary our ordinary course. Gourmand, said Council. He makes my mouth water. It remains to be seen, I said, if these forests are full of game, and if the game is not as such as will hunt the hunter himself. Well, said Mr. Aronow, replied the Canadian, whose teeth seemed sharpened like the edge of a hatchet, but I will eat tiger, loin of tiger, if there is no other quadruped on this island. Friend Ned is uneasy about it, said Council. Whatever it may be, continued Ned Land, every animal with 4 paws without feathers, or with 2 paws without feathers, will be saluted by my first shot. Very well, Master Lens and Prudence are beginning. Never fear, Mr. Aronow, replied the Canadian. I do not want 25 minutes to offer you a dish of my sort. At 8:30, the Nautilus's boat ran softly aground in heavy sand, after having happily passed the coral reef that surrounded the island of Gilboa.